Good afternoon, everyone. I am Court Ellingson, the MLA for Calgary Foothills and the Opposition Shadow Minister for Finance. I'd like to introduce you to the leader of Alberta's New Democrats, Naheed Nenshi, to give some comments on tariffs and the Premier's statement from earlier today.
Well, thanks very much, Court. I know that these are difficult and confusing days for many of us in the community, and I know that many of us are very nervous about what's going to happen now. What will happen to our jobs and our livelihoods? What will happen to our vacations? What will happen to our ability to go to the grocery store and get the things that we need? We are facing a crisis that's unlike anything that I've ever seen before in my lifetime. For decades, the United States has been our steadfast ally, our single most important trading partner, and the actions of this U.S. administration has damaged that special relationship. This trade war will hurt us all. Let's do a compare and contrast of the last 24 hours. Premier Wab Kinew in Manitoba pulled American liquor from store shelves and hung a giant Canadian flag in front of the legislature. Premier David Eby did the same, and he boosted local procurement across his government. Premier François Legault said he'd be there for Quebec businesses with loan guarantees, and he also pulled the liquor from the shelves. Premier Doug Ford in Ontario wrapped himself in the flag, pulled out the big guns, threatened to cut off electricity. Danielle Smith went on American TV and said she was sad. In fact, she expressed surprise that her friend Donald actually did what he said he was going to do. Now today, a full 24 hours later, to her credit, after scrambling to come up with a plan, she announced some small measures that are exact carbon copies of what the other provinces are already doing. Look, they're welcome. They're the right thing to do. But they often also show that the Premier had no plan. For months, she genuinely believed that if she promised Kevin O'Leary the sun and the moon and the stars in return for a golden ticket to Mar-a-Lago, she'd get 10 seconds with President Trump and she would convince him that his entire economic policy was wrong. Of course, that had no chance of success. And what we see today is there was no success. So today she did some good things. She changed her tone a little bit. She actually mentioned Canada for once. But her strategy hasn't changed, even though she's admitting it failed. So here are the real problems with what she said today. First and most important, she's still taking Trump's side. He's made it very clear, for example, that this isn't just about the border, but she's still talking about the border, as though that's going to make any difference. Her response to the fact that, as we've all learned, Canada is far too exposed to the U.S. market is to make us even more exposed to the U.S. market. This UCP government already wasted $1.5 billion of Alberta taxpayer money on Keystone XL, and now she's talking about brand new pipelines, not to the east or the west, but brand new pipelines to the United States, in addition to pipelines to the north, to Churchill, to Alaska, all over the place. None of these actually exist, and she knows none of these will get built within her political lifetime. She's just trying to change the channel from her incompetence and her corruption. She also said that the answer is to renegotiate the new NAFTA, CUSMA. Again, that's way above her pay level, but at the same time, it plays into the wrong frame. Why would you want to renegotiate an agreement with the people who just ripped up the last agreement that they negotiated? We need trust in the situation, and we don't have any. And the Premier, again, instead of fighting for Alberta, is giving in, is acquiescing on every single point. In short, she's being incredibly naive. Her strategy has failed, and I'm not sure she understands that. Let's just do a quick compare and contrast. Yesterday, Premier Doug Ford was aggressive. He said he would cut off electricity to the United States. He got a phone call from Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary. Lutnick didn't call Danielle. Ford didn't play nice on that call, unlike our Premier. And he got the auto sector a deal. Our Premier has failed on every front, for energy, for agriculture, for all of the other export materials here in Alberta. Very briefly, here's what we actually need to do. There's a 5-part strategy here. The first is we have to strengthen our internal markets. It's time to stop talking about interprovincial trade barriers, things like building codes and professional accreditation, and take them down now. Second, we have to use the best tools we have vis-a-vis the United States. That means taking nothing off the table. That means showing our teeth when we need to show our teeth. It means threatening when we need to threaten. It means giving up concessions when we need to give up. The Premier has no strategy here except exposing our soft underbelly and asking for a scratch. It's not going to work. Third, we have to use this opportunity to diversify our global markets. That means building the infrastructure, yes, that we need, but not pipe dreams, actual pipelines. Building the infrastructure that we need in order to get our resources to export markets. For the first time ever, I heard the Premier finally repeat something I've been saying for weeks, which is the one export pipeline we do have, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, is mostly exporting to California right now. It's time to use that pipeline to export to global markets and to build global markets. And thanks once again to Rachel Notley for getting that pipeline built. Fourth, we haven't heard a word from this Premier about what are we going to do for the people who are going to lose their jobs. People in the beef industry are scared. People across agriculture industries are scared. People who work in the oil patch are asking me, what does this mean to me? And we have heard nothing from the Premier about how we will make those people better, how we'll help them with their mental health, how we'll help them with retraining, with new jobs, and so on. All we know and all we've heard from the Premier is she's expecting unemployment to massively increase. Fifth, and perhaps most important, this isn't just about defense. We can turn a shield into a sword. And that means right now we need to do what we did so successfully between 2016 and 2020, but amp it up. And that means going to Americans, going to the world's best scientists, the world's best researchers, to doctors and to nurses and saying, you can have a better life here in Alberta. You can have a better life in Canada. Let's take advantage of what the world has dealt us and use it to try and bring some of the world's best talent right here and home. What is obvious is that the Premier herself was surprised that her charm offensive failed so badly. And now what we need is grown-up government, ethical government, and competent government. So with that, we'll go to questions.
All right, thanks, folks. So we'll start with questions in the room. No questions in the room? Okay, we'll go to Zoom. So remember, if you are joining us on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. If you're joining us on the phones, you can use *9 to get into the question queue. We'll start with Shalane from CTV News. Right, your line should be open.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, just wondering when you're on your second note there, talking about showing our teeth and not being scared to make those threats, as you mentioned Premier Ford did in Ontario. Should we take that as to mean you would be supportive of threatening or cutting off energy to the United States or an export tax?
I think the critical thing here is not to show your cards in advance, which is what the Premier has unfortunately done. It was interesting today because she actually did talk about curtailment, which has been a strategy that has been used in the past to support the oil and gas industry when prices fall. I don't know if that's the right strategy. I'm not sure that in any way that it is today, but I think the foolishness of starting by saying, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to hurt you in any way in retaliation. Well, Doug Ford showed us that actually standing up for our industries, standing up for Alberta and standing up for Canada can actually be effective.
All right, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just wondering about the claims made from the White House today. We heard from the White House press secretary saying that the illegal fentanyl seizures went up 2,000% from the northern border. The Premier was asked a question about that, didn't directly dispute those numbers. Do you? And is there an effort, I guess, a point in focusing so much on the border if
Yeah.
this means?
I mean, it's really hard here because yesterday the president didn't mention the border at all. And he talked about how his goal was to bring Canadian auto plants into the United States. Today, he talked about fentanyl. But I think the challenge is that the Premier has been solely focused on the fentanyl issue. And today she said something I've never heard before, that Canada is a next net exporter of fentanyl. I'll take her at her word. The stats that I've seen show that we import more than we export, but I'll take her at her word that she has better data than I do. But that said, we're absolutely a net importer of migrants. We're a net importer of meth, of cocaine, of all kinds of illicit drugs, certainly of weapons. And, you know, everything the Premier is doing, Miss Stay in her lane is absolutely jumping into the federal government's lane and managing the border. And it's all about stuff coming into Canada, not stuff going out from Canada. So if, in fact, we're actually seeing an increase in seizures, I'll just say, isn't that what the president wanted us to do? Seize more stuff before it goes into their market?
Okay, our next question comes from Jack from CP. Jack, your line should be open.
Awesome. You can hear me?
Hi, Jack.
Hello. Okay, so I really only have one question. I won't take up too much time. I'm kind of curious your overall thoughts on the, you know, we're going to change procurement to, you know, Canadian companies only, and in response to this, but I guess I'm wondering your thoughts on maybe that should just be like a kind of like a permanent policy going forward. Like, why are we contracting government services to United States companies when presumably we can get those same services and goods and everything else we need from Canadian companies themselves?
Great. You'll notice that the Premier, first of all, let's just say, let's not trust anything the Premier says about procurement. The Corrupt Care scandal has shown us that procurement is a serious weak spot for this government, that they don't know how to do it. The good news is I do know how to do it. And the Premier today said that she wants to procure only from Canada, from Alberta, and from free trade markets. That's a really, actually, really important point, because when we were at the City of Calgary, we were precluded from a lot of our buy local initiatives because of these trade agreements. And so, in fact, we have a trade agreement with the United States, and I assume she's saying, if you violated that trade agreement, we're going to violate it too. I'm not sure. It's worth asking her that. But no, a local procurement is good. Absolutely. We should be fostering wealth-creating entrepreneurs in our community. But let's be clear, local procurement means fostering wealth-creating entrepreneurs. It means helping Alberta businesses grow. It does not mean throwing government contracts at inflated prices to our friends, as we've seen in the Corrupt Care scandal, allegedly.
Jack, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, actually I do. One thing, if you're in the media world or a politician, like the kind of discourse around the trade war has been ongoing for the past 2 months, and now it's like officially begun. We're less than 48 hours deep into it, so we haven't really seen the callous phrase, but like the casualties of the trade war, whether that's job losses, whether that's businesses closing, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that we have yet to be seen in really any of provinces, what kind of social programs at the federal level or provincial levels will be created in response to the trade war, and I'm curious what you'd like to see on that front.
Yeah, you know, we did see in the budget last week that the government is assuming that unemployment will rise to 7.4% this year. But that was on a 15% tariff estimate. We have 25, and various other economists, Trevor Toome at the University of Calgary, for example, are estimating much higher unemployment levels. Professor Toome, additionally, is suggesting that a lot of that unemployment will happen in rural areas. And so it's very clear that we've got to do something. We've got to help people financially. We've got to help them with their mental health through all of this work. And we've heard nothing from the government. In fact, buried in the budget, you will have seen that one of the few areas where they increase spending on social services is they assume more people will need income support, more people will need what we used to call welfare. We can do better than that. And we can invest in things like retraining, in more work to attract foreign direct investment to Alberta from places other than the United States, in job creation, as well as in social supports. And we haven't heard any of that from the provincial or the federal government for that matter.
All right, we'll do one last pass for questions. Okay, and with that, that concludes our press conference.
I'll say a couple of lines just to conclude. This is a real crisis, and I know that a lot of our neighbors out there are really, really worried. But you know what? We get to live here. We get to live in a vibrant place with a vibrant economy. We're going to be okay. The energy sector is going to be okay. The rest of us are going to be okay. What we've built here is too precious to let go. But we're going to fight like hell to make sure that we're going to be okay.
All right, thanks, folks.